Well, good morning, everybody. You're listening to the RepcoLite Home Improvement Show, and quite honestly, you're going to be really happy you are. More happy than normal. If that's even possible. I know that's tough to believe, but this week's episode is going to be a bit different. The whole thing is a conversation that I had with Andrea Magno from Benjamin Moore. And if that name doesn't ring a bell for you, Andrea is the Director of Color Marketing and Design, and she plays a key role in the development of color tools and color research. And on top of all of that, she heads up the search for Benjamin Moore's Color of the Year. She and her team are constantly working to position Benjamin Moore as a leader in the world of color, and we're really excited to have her on the show today. Andrea, it's good to talk to you.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Now, I want to get into a big conversation on what you do and what you think about color and trends and all of that, but let's start with Color of the Year. You know, you play a major role when it comes to the big reveal every October. Let's just begin there. How long has Benjamin Moore been doing this whole Color of the Year thing?
So actually, it's kind of funny. It has been going on for several decades, as a matter of fact. I was actually recently going through our archives, and I found some trend reports going all the way back to the early 60s. So the difference is that, while there were trend reports happening, year after year after year, it really wasn't until, I'd say about 10 years ago that it started becoming a really big thing where we have, events and the virtual launch and, so on and so forth. But even I would say going all the way back to about 2005, Benjamin Moore has had a brochure and some of the different collateral that goes along with it.
Sure.
But I think over time, more and more people have become interested in it, and it's become this anticipated announcement,
Yeah.
So it's funny, people think, maybe this is something that's a new phenomenon over the past 10, 15 years, but, it's impressive to see the way that trends had been tracked, many years ago.
Now, you said you went back through archives and you found stuff going back to the 60s.
Yeah.
How cyclical are some of these color trends that you see?
Well, it has a lot to do with, what's going on in the world, and, is it a time of optimism? Is it a time when things are a little bit uncertain? And that's, I think, a component that comes into what colors people are really gravitating towards. So if it's a real optimistic time, you're going to see the more bold and bright, happy kinds of colors, whereas when it's, uncertain, it's a little bit more comforting, that sort of thing. But then there are also some correlations that you can make between colors being a little bit warmer, a little bit cooler, so there's a lot that goes into it. And it's very interesting to track over time the way that it changes.
Yeah.
And the way that things come back, you look at, colors from the 70s, right? There was a lot of brown, a lot of greens. We're seeing a lot of that now,
I know. Those of us who grew up with it, I remember the gold shag carpet and the avocado, appliances. I don't need more of that in my life, but it is funny to see younger people. Wow, look at this. This is really cool.
Right.
Yeah,
it's true. It's true. And then you get into some of that, the nostalgia, some different things like, ooh, it's vintage. All right.
That absolutely is so true. Because, even though I don't really have a great vibe towards some of those colors, part of the time, it really does tug at you. That's what Grandma had. That's what Mom had when we were growing up. Who knows?
But it comes back in a fresh new way, right? So it's not exactly the same, but, there might be notes of, say, whatever year, but then, it's got a whole new revamped persona. So it feels current, right?
Well, and that's really good because I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen, fashion is connected to this. It's kind of strange how that works, but I've seen all kinds of ads. I don't know why lately, but from 70s, clothing ads and guys wearing these ridiculous plaid shorts. And so I know these things come back, and I'm glad they come back in a little more modern version of themselves. So I can tolerate them a little better.
That's true.
All right. How long have you been heading up this whole Color of the Year thing?
I've been involved in it for many years. I would say since about 2014, I started becoming really involved with it. And I would say heading it up since about 2021.
All right. So this year's color is Blue Nova. I guess
Yes.
Talk to us about the process. What goes into picking a Color of the Year?
So there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, it may not seem that way at face value, but, there's a number of months of research that we do, whether it's travel, it's, international travel, it's domestic travel, it's going to different events, it's going to, looking at what's happening at retail, looking at what's happening culturally, socially, in design, different, even looking at influences in art, in the way that colors are used together. Even if it's artwork, you're walking through a museum and it's a piece of, it's a painting from 200 years ago, but maybe there's something about the way that color's being used that you're seeing replicated in other things happening today. And so basically what we'll do is if we launch in October, immediately after we launch, we're already thinking about the next year. So, our antenna goes up, we're looking to see, what's happening in the world. And so our team, everyone individually, is pulling together all of these bits and pieces, taking pictures of anything and everything that just catches our eye. And honestly, nothing is off limits. I mean, if you see a car that is in some, really interesting finish or an interesting color, take a picture of it. Really anything is brought to the table. And then what we'll do is get together as a team and start workshopping it and synthesizing it to see, how are the puzzle pieces fitting together? Is there a color family that's really standing out? And usually when everybody is gravitating towards maybe cooler colors, warmer colors, particular color family, that's where, we start to say, okay, there's definitely a story starting to unfold here. And, how is the concept, what is happening in the world that is going to be part of whatever the concept will be? How can we then articulate that through color and looking at the colors that we've been seeing through all of our travels? So there's a number of things that are happening concurrently.
Yeah.
And it's really amazing the way that everything starts to come together and really, really form this narrative that really shapes what we put out there then, several months later. So I would say by end of January, we usually have the color and the palette picked out. So it's picked out well in advance.
Yeah.
Sure.
So you start in October, right after the reveal. You don't get any breaks at all. You go straight into it again. And by January, you've already got it figured out.
Yeah. And it takes a while, when you think about all of the different pieces, whether it's the photo shoot and planning for all of the different components and, building out all the, whether it's trainings and presentations. So there's a number of moving parts and it takes time. So, to stick to our timeline, we do have everything pretty locked in the first quarter. Definitely.
Wow. How much stress does this bring about? I mean, is it just all sheer joy the whole time? Or is there a level of stress that happens as you're choosing that next color?
It's not. Choosing the color and working on the palette is really not stressful. I think it's more a matter of iterating. I mean, sometimes we'll land on a palette or we'll have, sort of a sketch of a direction and everybody's really on board. We think it's great. And then we'll come back literally 2 days later and say, what were we thinking? That just doesn't seem right. It's not hitting the right note. And that's where, and that's the most part of the fun of it, where, you keep iterating, you kind of keep working the palette so that way we get it to a place where we all feel really good about it and we have a really solid story to put out there. That's a really important part of it. And fortunately, I would say that, the team is very agreeable. I mean, we'll definitely have some healthy debates over some colors, typically colors that maybe are a little bit more wild, maybe that, maybe are a little bit more daring for a paint color. But, we have very good relationships. We're lucky so that we do land in a place where everybody feels heard and, the different things we're seeing are represented. How big is that team? It's only 6 of us.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So if it got ugly, it'd get ugly fast. So it's a good thing that everybody works out, it works out fairly well. I love what you said about, the story, finding that story. I don't know what role you played when Simply White came out. a few years back. And I remember hearing, oh my goodness, Simply White. How can that be the color of the year, And I loved the story behind that, and I got behind the idea of, white doesn't need to be this sterile atmosphere like I had anticipated, the story to be, the narrative to be. I couldn't imagine a narrative, and yet the narrative was so great with that, and it really helped propel that color forward, at least in our conversations. We sell paint and we're talking to people, and it was really fun to have that story. That story is so important for selling the color and the idea of it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that was a good, that was a lot of fun that year because we kind of looked at it from different personas and the way that different creative people would use the color white and, how it would come to life in their home and what they would pair it with. Like we had a ceramicist was one of our personas. One was a gallery owner, so it was almost even thinking about the undertones of white, right? There's so many variations of white and how we were able to, bring that to life in a home that had exposed wood beams and maybe, it was a little bit of a warmer white, whereas in another home it was a cooler white, and then the colors that were paired with it fell a little bit to the cooler side. So, that was, and I would say that was probably the first year where we had the big event. And, I think that was when the whole anticipation for color trends and color of the year really started to take some solid momentum.
All right, I think we're going to hit pause right there and take a quick break, and then I'll be back with more of my conversation with Andrea Magno. Stick around. And we're back. You're listening to the RepcoLite Home Improvement Show, and I'm in the middle of a conversation with Andrea Magno, the Director of Color Marketing and Design at Benjamin Moore. Now, Andrea, my next question is a little bit long-winded, but when it comes to color trends and colors of the year, how do you envision people using them? I mean, last year's color was raspberry blush, and it kind of seemed more like a conceptual color. I guess what I mean is it felt like you were giving bold, saturated color the okay. Not necessarily use this one, but just use something with some color. Now, as you and your team work to distill everything that you're seeing into the color of the year for any given year, do you anticipate people will be using that exact color in all kinds of different applications throughout their homes and businesses because it's been named a color of the year? Or do you unveil a color of the year kind of as an idea? Basically with Blue Nova, are you telling people you may want to consider blue? We're going to see a lot of it in 2024, and here's a great blue you might want to think about. Long question, but what's your idea behind how these colors get used?
Well, so you have it exactly right with 2023 with raspberry blush. Yes, that was definitely a bold color, and really it was really intended to be more conceptual. I think, you put it really well, where, what we were feeling that year was, we were kind of coming out of everyone being shut in their house, we're on lockdown, people were just looking for color, and we were hearing that again and again, in different conversations. It was people were like, it's been all neutrals for a number of years. Neutrals are great, but I need a moment of color. And so that's where we felt like, you know what? Here's our opportunity to really go for it and make that color statement. And like you said, we knew that, we weren't going to have cans of raspberry blush flying off the shelves. And that really wasn't, I'll be honest, like that really wasn't our intention. We wanted to spark the idea of using a bolder color. And if it wasn't one of the colors in that palette, that's fine. It was more about just getting people to think about, maybe they had some smaller room in their house where it was an opportunity to play a little bit or, dip their toe in the water to use a color that was either brighter or darker or whatever the case may be. That could be a break from where their color comfort zone falls. Mm-hmm. And so, you have that exactly right. It was kind of like, maybe I should look at something that, is outside of the, Revere Pewters and White Doves of the world, right?
Sure.
But, and I did see there were a number of images that were sent into us of customers who did use colors from the palette, and they were fabulous. I remember there was a kind of almost like a vestibule, like a very small space in a house, kind of like a hallway little area that this I think she was a designer. She painted it in raspberry blush, the molding, the walls. It looked fantastic. And it was just this small moment of color that just sort of like punctuated the space, and it was really really inspiring. I wish I had a spot like that where I could have done something like that in my home. So yes, you have that exactly right. And I would say too that when we put our color trends palette and the color of the year out there, it's not a mandate to run out and use one of these colors. It's really what I look at it as it's this opportunity to bring, to highlight these colors that maybe nobody's noticed in the collection. It's really finding these hidden gems and sparking these ideas on how to look at color differently or, widen the consideration set. There's a number of colors. It's always interesting to see, what are the colors that we wind up going through a lot of samples, that we sell a lot of the samples. What are the colors that are almost, I call it like a sleeper color, that people really like, they really latch onto, so it's a lot of fun, but it's all about, having that color conversation, getting people inspired. It's not, you better run out and paint your room XYZ color because otherwise you'll be out of style. It's really just a matter of, getting people in the mindset and expanding their horizons. That was a big part of this year, was really, getting people to expand their color horizons. So
with Blue Nova?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a, blue is a comfort color for me, and if I like it, that means other people should like it. That's how we roll here. But it's an unusual one, it's got a little more of that violet to it, or a little bit of a purplish, very, very, light undertone, but it's there. And it's just not the normal blue that I would use. And yet it's really intriguing for that reason. I like that. I like that it pushes me a little bit outside. It's still a zone that I feel somewhat comfortable in, but I am stretching a little bit.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And, in looking at 2023, Starry Night Blue was, that was a really striking color. And Blue Nova felt almost like a slightly more muted, still, strong and then, standalone kind of color, but it felt more livable. So that was almost, like looking at the color progression. Blue Nova is definitely not a, timid color, I'll call it, but it definitely makes a statement, but it felt more livable than, maybe the colors that we had in 2023. But, it really has that mystical, mysterious kind of quality to it that we really fell in love with.
No, I think that was great. I really like that. I mean, for what that's worth. Now you guys you can take that to your team. Let them know. Dan from RepcoLite.
I will.
Big thumbs up.
I will.
Color is so powerful. That's what we're talking about. And it's really what determines how we feel about a given space and how we feel in that space. And because that's so true, we really need to make sure we get that color right when we tackle a paint project. Now, when we come back, we're going to be getting Andrea's recommendations for how you do exactly that. That's all just ahead. Stick around. And we're back. You're listening to the RepcoLite Home Improvement Show, and we're in the middle of a conversation that I had last week with Andrea Magno from Benjamin Moore. Now, Andrea is the Director of Color Marketing and Design at Benjamin Moore, and we ended the last segment talking about how important color is on a paint project. In fact, it kind of feels like that color is more important, at least in my mind, than the paint itself. You could have the right paint, and that's really important. You've got to have the right paint because that determines how long a space is going to look great and hold up. So I don't mean that paint doesn't matter. The paint quality itself doesn't matter. But really, I could paint my walls with a paint that's as durable as steel. It's going to last as long as marble. But if I hate the color, I don't think that durability is going to matter to me one little bit, really. Color really trumps almost everything, I think. So with that said, we got a lot of people out there who have projects on the horizon. If they're just starting that search for the right color for their next project, what would you recommend that they do so they achieve the best results possible?
Well, I think a lot of times, it's interesting. You kind of have two camps of people. There will be the people who have a decent idea of where they want to be color-wise, and then you have people who have no idea where to begin. So for the people who really don't know where to start, that's where it's useful to take a moment to, find some points of inspiration, and it doesn't have to be anything crazy. It's, go online, even scrolling through, Instagram and looking at some of the images from different companies, or it's even thinking about, what are the colors that you wear and you feel best in them? Or is there maybe a picture from a vacation or a hotel that you stayed in where, there was something really striking? Find any point of inspiration is a great starting point, right? And then maybe, if you're a little bit more, further down the funnel, I would say if there's something in the space to be painted that you can use as a point of inspiration, that's useful too. Like maybe it's an area rug, or a countertop has, marble veining or something like that. But taking the time to find that hub that you can work from is so important, because it's going to be really instrumental in narrowing down the colors. And then it's a matter of figuring out, do you want it to be darker? Do you want it to be lighter? And, you kind of go step by step to figure out, to narrow down within a particular color family. And then once you get to the point where you have a small number of contenders, maybe it's 3 colors, 4 colors, whatever it may be, I can't stress enough how important it is to sample, because I'm sure you see it all the time. If you're looking at color in the store, the lighting is going to be totally different than it's going to be in the home. And you really have to look at how that color is going to look in, bright daylight, in the evening, artificial light, particularly if it's a room that doesn't get great light. You really want to give yourself, a day or two to be able to, or more, time is not of the essence, but really to understand what that color looks like, because then once the paint actually goes on the wall, you're going to feel more confident that you know what the end result is going to be, and we see it all the time where people are under the gun. They don't have time to really go through, this whole process. But, if you at all possible can, that is absolutely the way to go. So you know what you're going to get.
Right. There's so many times, like you said, where people rush through, or I think honestly, a lot of the time, I've been in the same boat. I could have avoided this if I just reminded myself that the color sampling is an important part of the process. But I don't remind myself, and so I get other things lined up for my weekend project, and I'm driving to the store and I realize, oh, I got to figure that out. I kind of have an idea. And, oh, man, so many times that ends poorly. Or, a lot of the times people don't end up repainting, but they don't end up loving that space like they could have. Benjamin Moore has the samples, the color samples. You can get a half a pint's worth of paint. You can literally put it on the wall. You could put it on foam board and look at it and just live with it for a little while and get an idea what it's going to do in your lighting. We talked to somebody on the show years back where I believe they had a ton of greenery, greens, plants and whatever out their window. And at a certain time of the day, enough light came in, reflected off of that, and made the color on their wall look really crazy for about a half an hour. They had us out to we had to go out to the house and take a look at it, and it turned out there's nothing much you can do with that. But man, there's so many things that can affect how that color looks. And since the color's so important, taking that time to do that sampling is just going to save you headaches and whatever down the road.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that actually about the greenery thing, because that's the kind of thing that people don't necessarily take into consideration. But if you're using, particularly a white, and then, you hit a certain time of the day and you're like, but it has a green cast. Well, it's reflecting what's outside, And if you hate that, some people love that, and they love the variety that happens with the way, the light changes and so on. But, for other people, they want it to be, feel a little bit more constant. So, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
the sampling is huge.
So much is determined by the conditions in your space. Make sure you're checking out the color there. All right, Benjamin Moore, you guys have like a bazillion different color collections, it sometimes feels like. Do you personally have a favorite? And if you do, which is it and why?
Well, it's really hard to play favorites because, it depends.
Yep.
It's, pretty dependent upon what you're doing. But I would say probably my first go-to would be the classics, the Benjamin Moore classics, just because there's such good variety within that one fan deck, or that one portion of the display. And, you have such a wide range. There's some really, really great neutrals in there. You have some beautiful off-whites. But then if you need something that is a little bit more colorful, you do have a lot of options that are colorful, but yet I feel they're muted to the right degree that they make for good paint colors. They're really livable.
Sure.
So that would probably be my first choice, but I do love the off-white collection just because I think it's so helpful to have all of the whites in one place. You can really see the different undertones and, decipher, well, this one has more yellow in it, this one has a little bit more blue or green in it, which is really great. And I don't know if you've, entered into the Williamsburg foray, but there's some great colors in that collection.
Yeah, I like that one a lot.
Yeah, there's some really good ones in there. I always kind of, go through it, and I feel like I always find another color that I'm like, ooh, that's a really, really good one.
And the work that was put into pulling those historical color collections together is just amazing. The research that you guys did.
Yeah. No, in Williamsburg, and I love the historical collection too. I could go on and on here, but I feel like the Williamsburg collection is almost kind of like the, more punchy cousin to the historical colors, right? But yeah, the amount of research that was done in partnership with the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation is really amazing. We actually had the opportunity to go there, last spring, and we went on a tour of their facilities, and it's unbelievable the way that they will take a fragment of paint that they take from these actual buildings, these 18th century buildings, and then looking at it underneath a microscope and the way that they can decipher, they use these different resins or binders or whatever it is, that they can separate the layers to understand, what color it was and what was used to achieve that color. It's honestly fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
So, that, and then understanding that there's a story behind a lot of these colors. They were used in certain houses, or, such and such name is associated with, the family that lived in a particular house down there. So, there's a lot to it, and great colors. There's a lot of really nice neutrals, but then the bolder colors are terrific. I really like them for front doors as well. Some of the darker colors, Everard blue, love that one. Brush blue is really gorgeous. So there's some definite favorites in there.
It's really interesting how much color was used way back in the past. We've done a number of segments, and there's one that I want to get on, but I don't think I've recorded it yet. But there's letters that George Washington wrote during the Revolutionary War, writing back to Mount Vernon about the color that he wanted in whatever parlor or whatever was being built at the time. And it was this really, really, really deep green. And Thomas Jefferson used a really bright yellow. I never expected that. I expected these guys to be very, the colors are pretty muted, pretty basic. But no, it was all over the place. So digging into these, don't hear about these colors that go back a ways and think, wow, they're going to be boring. They're not. Absolutely not.
No. And, the other thing, too, with that is that a lot of times the colors that you used, or how bold the colors were, it was a articulation of your like wealth and, where you stood in the social hierarchy, which is kind of crazy, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, if you can afford to paint your walls whichever color, it's like, wow, you've arrived, So it's really amazing.
Yeah, I'm still painting my halls and my walls with the color of the lowest tier of that ladder. But someday, I can see that other rung, and maybe I'll get there. I'm on the phone with Andrea Magno from Benjamin Moore, and I've got a few more questions. We're just going to keep working through them, but we're going to have to do that on the other side. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll have the conclusion to my interview with Andrea Magno from Benjamin Moore. Stick around. And we're back. You're listening to the RepcoLite Home Improvement Show, and we're reaching the end of a conversation that I had last week with Andrea Magno from Benjamin Moore. Now, Andrea is the Director of Color Marketing and Design at Benjamin Moore, and among a ton of other responsibilities, she heads up the search and reveal of Benjamin Moore's Color of the Year. All right, let's get to the conclusion. Andrea, you've always got your eye on trends and color. I'm curious about interior trends. What's trending out there right now that you're really drawn to?
I feel like things are starting to balance out. I think we've seen a lot of, the pendulum kind of swinging, like everyone's going really, really cool. Or, I think we're getting to a place where warms and cools are really working together nicely. And I really like the way that people are bringing some of these darker colors into the home, going for maybe a color drenching kind of situation. I'm trying to figure out how I can bring that into my own home and get my family to go along with it.
Yeah.
It's really, I really love that. I love the darker colors, in a small dose, right? But it's very dramatic. It's impactful. And I think there's staying power for a lot of those colors too. It doesn't strike me as something that, is necessarily going to be a fad. I think there's some longevity to it.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly if you're going for something like a deeper green, like a navy,
Yeah, they can last. I remember when I remember lime green. I was working the paint store at that point, and I was so excited when all these vivid, bright colors. I mean, I'm talking 15 or more years ago, when that was big for like a brief section of time. It was exciting to me because I was mixing off whites all the time. It was really fun to make some crazy colors, and I was dead set on using lime green everywhere in my new house. I just had the first house and stuff like that. And thankfully, I gave myself a couple weeks to think about it, and I realized these don't have staying power. These are the colors that make you crazy by the end of the day. So what about any old trends that we don't have back but you really think should come back?
We do see some of the warmer colors coming back, so not quite the Tuscany motif that, we saw, like, what was that, 2008-ish, but, definitely some warmth, more wood tones coming back in. And so using warmer colors to complement that, I think is really nice. Greens, you talk about avocado green, I think the greens are quite popular too. So, yeah.
How about outside? Anything trending in exteriors that you're excited about?
I really like the way people are moving away from the notion that you have to use a bright white on the trim. I think even if you're using an off-white or if you're doing like a tone-on-tone monochromatic kind of thing, people are using the trim and highlighting the detail. And I think that really makes a house look so much more pulled together, and it makes the color choices look really, really deliberate, which I think is really nice. I do like the darker colors on the exterior. I think we're seeing a lot more kind of organic, nature-inspired kind of colors. For a couple of years now, we've been seeing like the black and the charcoal, which I think is cool. But now I think you're seeing more almost like mossy olive greens and that kind of thing, which is really nice too. So, people are getting more daring, I think, even with the exterior.
Well, and I think that's good. The charcoal, that was really cool when I first started to see that. And the other day I was driving somewhere and I looked down the road, down a side street, and I see 5 houses. We're out in the middle of nowhere. It's a country area. 5 houses in a row, every single one the same. They're not in a condo association. They're all private residences. So somebody was the first, and everybody else got on board. And I'm sure that they're not thrilled about that. But what you going to do? Anyway, let's keep going. What's your favorite part of your job? What gets you excited to get up and get to work in the mornings?
I think a lot of things. I think it's really the variety that comes with my job. I love that there's always something different that we're working on. No day is exactly the same. We're jumping from one project to another, and it's all creative, but then it's also with the intention of helping people choose color. I just love the way that paint it's such a attainable way to transform a room. It's not ripping out walls, it's not ripping out a kitchen, but you can do so much with a color change. And so for me, it's building things, whether it's digital tools or experiences, or it's the color cards or the different color tools that we produce, being able to help people to, make that change and transform their space. And for me, it's really satisfying and gratifying, I would say, when, people have that moment of like, oh my God, I'm breathing new life into my home. I absolutely love my room. And, having a hand in helping people do that, that's really, I love that.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I completely agree. And yeah, the change that can come about with color. I have a ranch built in the 50s, but they did an addition in the 80s, and the whole back half of the house really feels like the 80s. And it's coming around. We're bringing it out of that decade. By the time I get it out, that decade's going to be the decade to decorate in or to design in, so I'll miss the boat on that. But I had this huge fireplace that's just beautiful. We love it. But it's this heavy, dark brick, and it just completely... I didn't even really notice it because I'm living with it. But I had visitors come over with an eye for color, and they recommended I should get that. I should paint that. I should do something to that. And we did, and oh my goodness, what a change to the room. Unbelievable. A gallon or two of paint, a couple of hours... And a room that I thought was as good as it could be, was really good as it was just over the top. So, yeah, it's a ton of fun to help people see that, realize that, and pull the colors together. Now, I know you guys are hard at work. You just said you've got that color pinned down. You've had it pinned down since January. So the color of the year for 2025, you guys already know what it is. Still going to be October that the reveal comes out? Is that when we're expecting to hear? Do you have an official date or not yet?
Well, I can't share the official date just yet, but October, so keep your eye out. I would say in the coming weeks, we'll start to have some teasers and things like that, but definitely stay tuned for October.
Well, we definitely will. How hard is that to keep the lid on that?
There's a lot of people involved, and a lot of swearing people to secrecy.
Yeah,
for sure. But and then sometimes it's harder than others to, keep it, zip lips. But we do a good job, or we try pretty hard to do a good job that we don't, lose the surprise. No,
you guys do a good job with that, and excited to hear, Andrea, as a paint retailer, it's really exciting to be so closely aligned with a leader in the world of color like Benjamin Moore is. Everything that you guys do, you and your team specifically, not to mention all the other people at Benjamin Moore, but what you guys do really makes our jobs, in the paint store a lot easier as we're trying to do the things that you just talked about, try to help people find the colors that are going to make their spaces feel like home. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's great.
All right, there you go. That's it. That's a wrap. Another episode in the books, all packed up and ready to launch as a podcast where it's going to live on forever. Not in infamy, but in sheer glory. If you missed any parts of this interview with Andrea Magno from Benjamin Moore, make sure you go find the podcast and check it out. You owe it to yourself to do that. You can find the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Audible, pretty much anywhere. Just search the RepcoLite Home Improvement Show and then hit subscribe, and you'll never miss another episode. All right, whatever you do today, make sure paint's a part of it. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I'll see you next week. I'm Dan Hansen. Thanks for listening.